everybody. Welcome back to our weekly live stream. I'm your host, Jay Miller, developer advocate at Elastic. And this week I have for as long as I've been in the Elastic community, I would say a longtime friend, but I know for him, he's been in the community way, way longer than I have. One of my favorite people to talk to from outside of Elastic about Elastic, Rich Horace, who is the leader of our Orange County Elastic user group, and also, in my opinion, one of the most tinkering persons about Logstash. Rich, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Jay? Thanks.
I'm doing good. It's always good to have a conversation about like Logstash in general, but to have it with you just makes it like twice as valuable to me.
Yeah, I think Logstash needs some love, and hopefully I can do some justice today.
I love it. Well, as you just noticed, we have some chats going on that we are live on YouTube right now. So if you are in the YouTube channel, welcome. I'm happy that you decided to join us. We're going to get to know Rich a little bit before we jump into it. But if you have any questions for myself or for Rich, feel free to throw them in the chat. If they're related and we can answer them, we'll do that. If not, well, then I have a couple of other places to send you. One of those being discuss.elastic.co, where you can talk to other elasticians and technicians and all the other issues out there that decide to work on the Elastic Stack. We also have community.elastic.co, where we have plenty of events happening. I think this is like the third event today. So we have events happening all throughout the week, every single week. We do have Elasticon Global coming up, so be sure to head over to elastic.co, learn more about that. And of course, if you are new to the YouTube channel, be sure to give us a thumbs up on this video so we make more like it, and subscribe because that's what you do on YouTube. So, Rich, let's get started and learn a little bit more about you. How did you first get into using Elastic and Elasticsearch?
All right. Actually, about 15 years ago, I really got into log aggregations with Splunk, and it's really a game changer. DevOps was not at the point where it was taken off, and just the conversation you can have with developers about, hey, something just deployed. We're looking at these graphics. What's going on? And it just changed that conversation where it's not so much blaming people, but it's really became, how's the system running? Let's look at these dashboards. Let's look at the visualizations going on. And then about 2010, I started looking at Logstash. I was no longer working with Splunk, and it was kind of like my first entry point into what would eventually become the Elastic Stack. And at the time, Logstash was still doing MongoDB for the back end. And like I said, it was really early days, probably like 2011, 2012-ish. And I ended up getting a contract job and working with Splunk again. And then I've been doing tech ops, really, whatever you want to call it, with system engineering, DevOps, operations, whatever the latest ops kind of Sigma is going on right now. So when I joined a startup, and I already knew that I was going to be the first DevOps engineer. I was going to be employee number 19, and I wanted to start off the Elastic Stack. I knew I was going to do Kibana, Elasticsearch, and Logstash. And one of the things where I was working within Splunk within AWS was there wasn't a correlation between no metadata from EC2 instances and what was going to login. And that was one of the things I wanted to solve at this company called Nativo I was at. And that really grew from there. And I started going to the meetups for Elasticsearch. And there was an event in Santa Monica where they kind of did a one day before we were doing the live events was talking about Kibana 4, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I started looking at the meetup, and like I saw that they needed an organizer, so I hit the organizer up twice within 2 weeks, saying, hey, I'm really interested in running it, and that was in 2015. And I've been to every one of the conferences, and my goal around that is, build the community in LA. I try to do the third Wednesday of every week, of every month. And just really trying to go around LA and really building up this environment. And Elastic has come such a long way from back then. I was still using version 1, and then version 5, and then now I'm actually live with 7.14 in the current contract I'm doing right now. And this past year, I launched my own company, Secret Sauce Ops, and DevOps consultant services around AWS cost management, and of course, Elasticsearch. And I was really looking forward to this talk because Logstash has been, like I said, my entry point into the stack. And I think of all the other features and products that come along, I've done some things with Beats, but I just know Logstash the best. And that's what I'm currently doing. My current client, I'm actually not working, and actually not even working in AWS at this moment in time. Some AWS, but majority of the stuff is on-prem. And I'm working with hardware. They're a hardware vendor, and I'm working with their integration team. And I'm working with totally different data than I ever had before. I'm working with RESTful data, which I did before, but now also SNMP data. And I'm tying into these plugins that I haven't done with with Logstash. And I really have built this local test environment. And there's nothing worse when you really get the Elastic stack going. There isn't really a lot of day 2 operations, and how do you really get those? You have an existing system. How do you implement pipelines? How do you test before it goes into production? Nothing worse than having someone make a configuration update. Your dashboards are broken for the day because they weren't tested well. And then you get it after the indexes flip over to a new day, then you got to re-index it and clean it back up. So this is kind of where emphasis around this and what I've been doing, really the local development around Docker, Docker Compose. I've done a couple of my meetups sharing my configuration, and really about, how can you do it locally before you push it into Elasticsearch? And maybe this is a nice segue into kind of the talk itself, or if you want to ask some questions on that. But my thing is, don't even touch Elasticsearch, don't even touch Kibana. Do your data preparation before, and then get an idea what your results are, and then it'll make it easier once it's in production, once it's in the cluster. How are you going to work with it?
Well, I definitely want to get into the meat and potatoes of this because I'm super interested in this idea of before you start, making indexes and index patterns and trying to visualize everything, just kind of testing before you jump in. My process has always been similar to yours. You have you spin up a Docker instance, you send everything to that Docker instance, but instead of testing it, I kind of just throw it in there and then take a look and go it's not what I wanted, and then destroy everything. We were talking about it in one of the last live streams. I actually write in the code of when I ingest, I just immediately hey, just drop all of these indexes. You're not going to need these before I'm ready to go into production. And luckily for me, I'm an advocate, so I do a lot of demos, so it doesn't matter. But I know that you can't really do that in production. You can't just be like, we're going to add this new index to our pipeline. Let me just start throwing things in and dropping them instantly. So I'm super interested in this. I have to ask, because we had a question in chat. Are we going to be talking about fleet data at all in this?
No, this is going to be pure Logstash, and you could apply this. My examples overall, doing the local development, you could do with file B and anything that you're really going to do console out, stand it out, and then also if you're going to push into a log file itself, another file. But this has really been, how do you really test those configurations? Maybe sometimes, and what's really happened is when I was at the company Nativo, we're starting from scratch. And from day one, I got the developers buy-in and my CTO's buy-in to have our application logs be written in JSON. Now, since I left there, I've gone to a couple of places, and it's not like that. It's I'm working with the data they have. I'm doing a lot of syslog data, and you really need to, enrich the data, prep the data before it goes into the cluster. And there's a challenge sometimes when the developers, from the whole development lifecycle perspective, developers are trying to build their features, and sometimes creating proper logs in JSON is sometimes on number 11 on a list of 10. They would love to be able to do it, but they need to really be able to focus on what they need to get done on a day-to-day. But then if you can start adding value with the current logs, and then once you get that going, all of a sudden you get the buy-in, and it can become a bigger focus for those teams. And what I like about if you do get the teams to buy into JSON is it really, the whole filtering process becomes so much easier, because one, they're producing data that they need, and because they're writing the JSON around that, but they're creating the fields. So from a filtering perspective, it's really should just be going right into Elasticsearch much more easily. I'll give you an example. One was when we're doing ad servers at TiVo. We would always deploy, make sure all the metrics are looking good, and then we would revert if necessary. And we did this. We had 3 AWS regions that we would deploy to, and we do one at a time. And if there was an issue, we would roll back. They would fix it, maybe add another metric, push that back out, and be part of the release. And it didn't have anything to do with DevOps. They had the ability to add those metrics themselves. And that's the huge part about when you really become a data-driven organization. And in the TiVo, over 6 years, it really became ingrained. If something happened to Elasticsearch, we would stop a deployment, make sure we get the visibility, because you hate flying blind. And it's a nice luxury to have when you're able to see those metrics and have the teams care about the metrics that were put into the cluster.
I love it. And we're going to get everybody ready for this setup. We're going to be working off of a repo that you've prepared for us. And just like Naveen asked, if you have a question about, hey, are we going to be covering this? We're going to be talking about this thing. Even when the answer is no, still ask those questions. I promise you, we have some folks in the chat, probably a few that might even work at Elastic, might work for the Logstash team, may be able to get you those links, those resources that you're looking for. And on top of that, we take note of all the questions that come in, and those questions inspire future live streams. So Naveen, I'm sorry, we're not going to be talking about Elastic Fleet with Logstash in this case, but I have made note of it, and hopefully we can get an upcoming event to cover just that, or maybe we can get some comments in the chat. If anyone else knows some good resources, feel free to throw them in the chat to help them out. That said, Rich, we've given everybody the GitHub link. I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to let you drive here and show us what you got. And remember, folks, this is also an AMA. So if you have any questions about what's going on, throw them in the chat. We'll be putting them up on the screen. We'll be asking them. We'll be doing all those things.
Okay. Just to set it up before I share my screen, is my approach around this was, someone who's new to Elasticsearch itself, wants to learn a little more about Logstash, might not even be on the team that manages their cluster at their company and something, but this can be used for personal projects. It can be used for just get more knowledge. And I do have some, we're going to test the demo gods today, but I have placed some errors in that just in case, but basically we'll go through that if necessary. But really, my examples will start to build off each other, and I will explain how we're going to be doing, how the Docker setup, because I will spend a little bit of time there, but each example will get faster, because one thing is I know this data, you guys don't. And when it's really about the format and the structure around the logs and configuration that I really want to get across. So I do have 5 examples we'll get into potentially if we make it all the way through. So let me share my screen now. All right. So move this over here. So can everyone see my screen? See the repo?
Yep, all there. Let's full screen
Okay.
it so we can make it a little bit bigger.
All right. How's that?
There you go.
Okay. Let me just talk a little bit about Docker first. So I have just enough Docker and then the walkthrough for the examples. So just enough Docker is really it's really going to be driven from this env file, and the env file will have the Elastic version that we want to run. What's really nice about Docker is you can, at least with the official Docker images from Elastic, is you don't have to run the latest and greatest. You can go all the way back to version 6. So what's really nice, if you see some type of post that has an older version, but you're interested in what that person put together, you can easily spin up a container from an older version. And this repo has 3 Docker files. So we have Docker Compose itself, Docker Compose persistent, and Docker Compose ingest. So the Docker Compose is this YAML file itself is really just an opportunity to test new features. So it's really ephemeral. So basically, you can just do Docker Compose up -D. It's going to run in the background in detached mode, and it's going to spin up Kibana and Elasticsearch based off of the version number. Here you can poke around, maybe see new features. If there's new release, I know 17.15 is coming out soon. So if you're interested in that, you can easily check out those new features. Docker Compose -persistent. Here, I started introducing Docker volumes, where here it will actually create a Docker volume locally and allow you to, you have the ability to stop or even take down the Docker containers, but you're not going to lose your data. And for this one, I just have same thing, sticking with Kibana and Elasticsearch. And then for Docker Compose ingest, this is where we introduce Logstash. So same thing, create the Docker volume, but I do have some additional configuration files for Logstash that makes it easier for us to manage and work with pipelines and also work with the Docker YAML file, the logstash.yaml file. And here's a few other useful commands where Docker PS, you can see the list of containers running. Docker exec, IT for interactive mode, I call it. But you can go into the Logstash container itself and go into a bash session. And here you can actually even just run Docker run, and you will remove the container when you complete it. But here you can go interactive mode, and you can actually pass in the official version. So just want to give some highlights there. Let me take this over to my VS Code, be a little easier to read. So, like I said, here's the Docker Compose YAML. Basically, we create 2 services, Elasticsearch, and you can see right now I'm passing in the version 14.1, and also I'm just added this recently, putting the cluster name in just to make it a little more consistent across the repos I'm starting to create. So the environment, the only thing in the environment is just really passing in the cluster name itself. Also the Java options, and for this, I'm only going to run 1512 memory meg for the heap. And then also there's this discovery .type single node, and basically this removes any of the security you would need to. So you have to worry about login and so on. But this is definitely not recommended for production. But this is really great for local testing. We don't have to worry about setting up the security. And we open ports 9200. This is the way I think of it as the left is the host, and to the right of the colon is the inside the container. And then the same thing with Kibana. So let's come here and let's launch this just to see that it does work. So Docker compose. I'm not going to run it. I'm going to run it in the foreground so you can actually see it come up. So this is coming up.
While that's doing that, I know you mentioned it spins up Elasticsearch and Kibana instance. I'm assuming you might cover this in a second, but how come it didn't spin up Logstash as well, or at least give you an entry point into Logstash?
Because this will be just really testing the newer features. Typically, you'll see from the blog post whether it's really I want this to be a throwaway environment, and here potentially you could just really work with like what I've been using lately is the sample data. So not really ready to do any type of ingest, but there's times where, hey, you know what? I want to see what this new feature looks like. I just want this throwaway environment that if I want both. And the other thing would be if I with the Logstash Docker Compose persistent YAML file, you know, maybe I already ingested my data. I don't have to run Logstash. Really, to run Logstash only when I need to ingest data is kind of my thing. I have one side project, and we'll see a little bit of the data, but I'm a big user of getpocket.com, and I say that's kind of my bookmark, and I've been using it for over 10 years, and I've been pulling that data into the Elastic Stack. But if I'm not pulling in any new data in, I really don't need to run Logstash. So it's kind of a little bit of the workflow around that.
Really,
and just
quick,
to show you,
can you zoom in on the screen a little bit? The resolution is this is one of those things where we tell people like the latest and greatest technology is great, but widescreen monitors are so hard to screen share. Maybe can you do one more?
Yeah.
One more on the zoom in. There we go. I hope that's. I know we had someone in the chat. Let me know if that's good or if we need to do it a little bit more.
So here, what I just want to show right now is, we have the data from there. So right now I'm in the dashboard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kill it. So this Control C on Windows, Command C on Mac. So now it's no longer running. So if we come back to the browser, your refresh is going to fail. But if I spin it back up, you see starting. And I'll explain a little bit after on how the containers are named within Docker Compose. So it's coming back up, and all right, so Kibana's not ready yet, and you'll see it come up. Oh, got me wrong. I'm sorry. Yes. No. Didn't expect that. Let's see. I didn't kill it. I guess. Yeah. When you, I know one thing Docker does protect your data. So if we did a Control C, actually no, I didn't do. The containers are still there. I'm gonna do it down. So actually, technically, I stopped the containers. So let me just make sure I'm on the right track here. All right, so down, so I remove them. Docker goes back up. There we go. And now for the dashboards, there's nothing there. So, like I said, if you don't, you can stop the containers and we'll keep them. But if you down the container, you don't want to run it, then your data will be deleted. All right. So let's I just want to show that because it is really quick to move between and really launch it up and down. Let me talk a little bit about the persist. The only difference between the files is I add volumes, and I just named it ES data 1, and I also set up a network ES network, and the volumes are set for local. In the ingest, we'll get a little more into the meat of things. Same thing. Didn't do anything for Elasticsearch, but here in Logstash, I start doing our configuration. So my structure for Elastic, and this is something I kind of really developed over the last couple of years, last 3 or 4 years, is I have data where we can have the logs. I also have the Elastic config. I'll have Elasticsearch, I'll have Kibana. If I have any configuration files I want to put in there, I'll add them in there. And then for Logstash, right here you can see the Logstash YAML file. And one thing I do is I set the host 000. This is actually part of the default Logstash Docker container itself. But I've added this more recently is this reload. And what will happen is when you change a pipeline or you change a configuration file of a pipeline, it will automatically reload. And this is what, once you start getting into testing, you can really see this. These changes go really fast. And that way, if you're depending on what you're doing for your tests or you're trying to develop your configurations, this is where it will reload automatically. And I just set logs to give it a certain path, and also set that to JSON format. And really, there is if you run the official Docker container, and there is a Logstash sample file that really has all the settings. And the pipelines is where we're going to do majority of this presentation and kind of the walkthrough. And so pipelines, I'm pointing to the pipeline folder itself. But what we'll be able to do is uncomment these and reload the configurations for us. Let me say that. I don't want to load that immediately. I was doing some testing before meetup. So ingest. So here I point the my local Logstash YAML file to within the container. Pipelines, same thing. I point to within the container. And here I'm pointing the Logstash pipeline directory to Logstash pipeline within the container itself. And if we log into the container directly, you'll see this folder structure once we launch it. And then for the logs, here I have my data logs. And the reason I kind of do this outside of the Elasticstack folder is just so, maybe it's not there, maybe it's in a different location, but I try to separate configuration from actual logs. So let me go into example 1. Now this is just be a general example. So Docker Compose. Let me clear my screen so you guys can see this. Right. So Docker Compose, if you just run Docker Compose up, it's going to run the Docker compose.yaml file as the default, but you can pass in another configuration file. I'm going to ingest, and I'm going to do up, and I'm just going to do Logstash. So within here, when I'm passing in, so I'm passing Docker compose, telling it the file, telling it to do an up. But now I'm just going to launch the Logstash service itself, and that's one nice part about having ingest, having multiple services within the Docker Compose, but you have the opportunity to say, hey, I just want to do this. And maybe to your point, Jay, hey, you know what? Do I need to log? I could just launch individual if I want, but my kind of workflow is really getting away from that. And I really want to have one that's more ephemeral.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the things that I'm hoping that I will probably adopt in my own setup of, even when you're working with demos, if you have, instead of blowing up everything and then trying to reload it, only working with the individual, segments of your Docker Compose, which is probably how Docker Compose is supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
But sadly, I don't get to play around with it as much as I'd like to these days.
Okay. Yeah. So this example, what I like about this is I get to see the output. I get to see what each one of these will be an event in Elasticsearch once we do push it in there. Now this example is, you come in here, I've started using this generator plugin. So I have the link in there, and you can get it from the repo too. But what the generator allows you to do is you get to say the number of events you want to do. So right now we still have this running. And say you're making some tweaks and you want to, save it again, you're going to see it run again. And one thing I like is you see what pipeline is running. Let me go up to this higher one first. So what I've been doing, and I think Jay, you and I were talking, is like once you start getting into multiple pipelines, what you notice is, hey, you know what? I have data flowing through this pipeline. I do not want to affect it. And by breaking it up into separate configuration files, if there's nothing to do, it will not do anything. Based off, there really are isolated configurations and looking at different inputs into the Logstash input, filters, and then output. So this is a quick example here. What I'm going to do now is, like I said, but this has come in handy if you're on Discuss, someone's sharing their configuration. Hey, here's my log message. Here's an opportunity to kind of really take that, paste it in, and work with it, and then maybe build out some filters. One thing about Logstash is you always need an input. If there's no input, it will fail. And sometimes it makes it a little tricky to get that first, hey, I just want to run the Logstash container and play around with it. But you need to have this definitely. It's one of the requirements. Otherwise, it will fail. It doesn't know what to do. So this was a really quick example. I've used this, especially working with syslog and different formats. Like I said, my client right now, some of the syslogs, they're doing some JSON, some broken JSON, and I was able to play around with the message itself and kind of come up with a proper format and kind of work through that. Like I said, it's really quick. You don't have to worry about any other external files. What's nice is you can have it all right here. Very simple to look at. So let's talk about the sect. So, okay. Here, I'm going to share, these are all the Docker commands I've been running for the last couple months, all the way back to July. So you can kind of see some of the crazy things I'm doing where I've actually just run the Docker compose up Logstash, and I'm actually just grepping on fields that I've been creating. And I've been kind of this has been a little bit of my crazy workflow. It's whatever would work for you. But this is just some of the things I've just been doing, is testing, going through up and down, up and down. So I wanted to kind of share, like, yeah, I am doing this live, well, as part of my working with my client and trying to figure these things out. So I'm like, hey, you know what? Here's a whole bunch of different examples. I'll put into the presentation. So we'll talk about Grok, which is another filter which is based off regex, which is really heavy, really expensive to run, but then also you got to really figure, if you haven't worked with regex before, it's kind of a tough entry point into, like, okay, I want to stop playing around with this. So dissect is a nice filter where it's really just taking fields based off a format. The way I look at it is regex can really help you with some little less structured data a little more consistently. And dissect is really, if you have some data structure that's fairly consistent, like, this command here, I have my history ID, date, and then I have my command, and then I have my command argument. I can make that consistent within dissect. And what I want to do now is just come in here. Let's see, I just want to grab a few different types of commands that I've run. So I'm going to copy this. So I found this site this summer. And it's really, this guy's created this version, kind of focuses on beats, but it can be used for Logstash. So we come here, paste in your sample logs, and that's be one per line. And what we can do here is, I'm going to call this field my hist ID. There is, just for the sake of time, there is 2 spaces between that, so I'm going to do one more space, and I'm going to create a TS with timestamp, and then I'm going to do another TS field, but I'm going to extend it, so I'm going to be able to put this together. Oh, sorry. This will be the only typing I do during the presentation. So, and then we have command, and then we'll have another space, and then we have so basically, if we run the submit, and you'll see right now, it gives you what the output would be. So basically, my command is Docker compose. Here's my argument is the -f, compose ingest down, -v. Here's my hist ID, and then there's the timestamp. So you can take, data and be able to create, fields out of that. So I've done that already. I'm going to here, and I'm going to add in 2 new pieces into this Logstash. So now we're going to play a little bit with this, just to kind of, okay. So for dissect, we're going to read the message line, which is going to be coming through from the Docker commands. Then the message is going to create a hist date, timestamp, command, and command params for this one. That's what I called it. And this minus arrow, this arrow says just grab the rest of the line, which is, so maybe you want to do this really quick. You want to get this field created, then you can do some manipulation on this field later through your filter.
So just to understand the full concept here, we have a log. Oh, I mean, the log itself was just the commands that you put in for your Docker commands. You are now looking at each line. You're running a regular expression against it to say, now separate this into individual fields that are going to be then translated into JSON and then pushed out as standard output, which I'm guessing is the next step. And then you're also doing manipulation on the timestamp as well. I just want to make sure that I'm following along.
Exactly. So I'm introducing the dissect filter plugin and then also the timestamp. So here we're creating the timestamp field, and we're going to mess around trying to get this format, because out of anything, it seems like it's the most challenging is working with dates on your files, especially when you don't control it. I know, Jay, you mentioned you're doing some stuff with CSV files and trying to figure out what the format of those timestamps are. It's definitely a challenge. You still there?
Yep, still here.
All right, maybe,
yeah, I think we had a.
Still there?
Yep. Rich, I think your audio switched. While Rich is doing that, let me see if we can get us back on there.
Let's see. Is that better?
Oh, can still hear you.
Okay. Oh, I thought you said that went off, so I had to go back to it.
You're still good.
All right, can you see my screen again?
We'll add it to the stream, but now we can. There we go. There's the.
All right.
We'll give you a second. There we go.
All right, so now, we still have the pipeline, the first example running. So let's do this. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to comment on this one. I'm going to expose the example number 2. Okay. Boom. Okay. So we have it parsed the logs, but it didn't create my fields, and I bet I didn't save this yet. Now let's run this. Okay. Now you can see it's running the sec2 example. But hey, what's going on here? All right. There's one part I didn't cover, and I kind of did it partially on purpose, is this sense-db. And what's really cool about the sense-db is it keeps track of where you are on the file. So it's, and this has really evolved the last couple of years, but basically, if Logstash were to be restarted, once it restarted, we'll know exactly where to start within the file, and we'll pick up where we're left off and process those, the file, kind of channeling it again. But this will be the point that it starts with. And I always like start position beginning, because maybe I'm pushing this Logstash configuration up for the first time. Maybe there's already existing files. It's just been kind of the way I've done things, where I want to try to cover as much as I can, and knowing that I have this sense-db, I know exactly where it was. So there's another trick. So let's just try deleting the sense-db. See if it does anything. Nope, still nothing. Come back here. sense-db is back. So those are some nice little protections. The best way to do this is comment this out, and I've seen this come up and discussed, like, hey, what can I do with to eliminate the sense-db, because it is set up by default in the container. So if we say here, and then boom, just like that. So what we're able to do is just push this sense-db to dead null. So anytime we save it, it's going to rerun this. And this is another nice way, hey, you know what? My dissect is not working, which we'll show in a second. Like right now, look at my timestamp. It's showing January instead of September. So here, what I'm going to do is come back here. I think we had DD in lowercase year. See if that works. Reruns it again, and there we go. Now my timestamp is correct. So what I want to show here is once you start working with the data, you can do things live and see it come up immediately because we have the configs to reload automatically. And this is a nice way to say, hey, you know what? My new release has some new data. If you tie it into deployment pipeline, Logstash configurations need to be updated as part of this. Here's a way you can do it. Here's a way you can update configurations on the fly without having to restart Logstash, which to me, to be quite honest, in the beginning was some challenges. And that's why I really did like the SenseDB, because that feature was not there. And that became available sometime in version 6.
So while you're transferring to the next demo, because I see more complicated example, I want to make sure
this will be. Now this is really what I wanted to show here. Is I want to show that there's more to this basically.
Okay.
I'll just show a little bit on the Grok. Here's the other format where I'm passing in Grok has some patterns that you can go after. Where here I'm looking at the URI, what's it called, protocol. I'm grabbing the host and I'm passing in this on a match.
Got it. I just want to make sure before we jump into something a little bit more complicated. While we got about 15 minutes left in the stream.
Yeah, we can skip this example too. I'll show you what I'm going to do.
No, please. Like, I want to see this, but for the folks out there that are like, yeah, this is Logstash doing what Logstash does. I want to make sure that we get this across that Logstash is a part of a larger stack, and it is the part of the stack that not a lot of people, except for the people that have been using it forever, get a lot of exposure to. And we tend to want to focus on showing everything in Kibana, showing everything in Elasticsearch, and seeing how that works. And of course, you can take this information. Right now, Rich is throwing everything into standard output so we can watch it and see what's happening. But at the end of the day, this can go into Elasticsearch. This can go into anywhere. One of our first live streams that we did was with Rye, who's on our Logstash team, and I think he put it best when he said, like, when you're not sure what to do with the thing, Logstash is probably a great place to start, because it gives you the ability to see what's going on and to look at it from that 3-point, issue of input, filters, output. So what we've been doing here is looking at those 3 concepts of input. We've looked at some simple concepts. Filtering, we've manipulated that data to make it digestible and put it into a JSON format so that we could do the next part, which would be output. Right now, we're just doing output to the screen because we're talking about testing, but the future would be you just change the output. So you're tinkering away and getting there.
Yeah, I have an example to do that right now, actually. So one thing I've been doing is you do also have an output. And I've actually been using this where, say my input is a RESTful endpoint and I'm at home or I'm offline, I'm on a VPN, I can't hit it. I've been actually writing out to a file, and I've been writing it and actually making it into JSON lines. And then I can reprocess that later. I know it's kind of there and I can fine tune it. And I've actually done that this summer, and is working with it this way. I never thought I'd be doing this, but it was one way, hey, you know what? I've done all this other work. I don't have to worry about that now. I can just focus on this. And so let me just do a quick thing on that, because yeah, it's great. Everything's going to the screen, but you know, you want to look at the data a little more, long term. And then here's the JSON files right now. And what you'll see here is, we have the timestamp correct. We have the command params. We have the message TS. Now, maybe this would make sense. Maybe this wouldn't make sense, but the option is there. You don't have to send it directly to Elasticsearch. I've sent things to S3 sometimes, but maybe you want to work with this data. Maybe you want to look at the JSON. So this is one option, because to Jay's point, you don't have to just do standard out. That's been kind of what I wanted to show. Here, we can skip this example itself because I have a better configuration and something I also kind of developed over the years. So what you can do with Logstash, when the pipeline is reading the configurations, it's just creating a big blob. And it goes alphabetically off of the file name. So if you have things that start with, if you do alphanumeric, things that start with 1 will go first, things that would start with 9 would go last, or based off that the order. And what I've kind of done over the time is I've actually started splitting out configuration files to make it easy to work with. And I want to show you this example. Just comment out these. So for here, what I've done is, and this is my standard 100s inputs, 500s outputs, and 900s is 500s filters, and then 900s output. And basically, what I just did was I took this file, took this part of the file, and just put it into input. Same thing here, did the 500, made this the filter, and then also still point out to standard out, but here's a nice little example, and if we run it and save it, and yeah, I only have 7 files in there, but basically this is like, so this is my get pocket where I'm passing in this data. Now this is really, like I said, you guys might be interested in the data, but it's really how can you start taking complicated configurations and making it more manageable. So maybe input never changes that often. Maybe the filters, you only want to really work on that, and then the output is already pointing out to it. So that was kind of how you can break it up into smaller portions. And the last example I had is kind of pulling it all together. And let me just save this off. So come here, and here we have out to Elasticsearch. And this is a little more, what we're doing here, we have 2 inputs. So we're doing the Docker commands, we're doing the get POC sample data. Now this is also important where, hey, you know what? I want this filter is only relevant to Docker commands. And basically I'm looking for what I did here, and this is, I like creating new fields versus having tags. I just think it's more efficient to say, hey, this is, match this field name. So here I'm adding the field, I do data source, and then I'm doing the same thing on get pocket. So my data source ends up being Docker commands, and then get pocket. And then here I'm saying if data source is Docker commands, run these 2 filters. If it's get pocket, run all these filters. And then I started just recently change my outputs. Maybe I want standard out, maybe I don't want standard out. So here we're pushing out to Elasticsearch. And I actually saw someone's example the other day, actually asking, like, how can I send data? I have one data source, I want to go to separate Elastic clusters based off some type of parameter. And this is kind of the way you would do it. Basically, my get pocket, I'm going to push out to host Elasticsearch 9200. I don't manage templates. Here's my index name. I want it to be logstash dash get pocket. And here I'm introducing document ID. So basically, this is going to be more kind of this. I want to be able, if I make any updates to tags and so on, next time I do my pull from get pocket, the document ID would be updated. And I want to do an upsert within Elasticsearch and update that field. So basically, what I don't want to have this data written across multiple indexes. I want to have this written in one index, and I can do an update on that. And then for Docker, here I am just saying, data source Docker commands, same host, manage template still false. But here I have the ability to create multiple indexes. And this is, you'll see this a lot in Logstash. Will be the Logstash, whatever your index name is going to be, and then the date format. So basically, this is going to create a daily index for all my lines within Docker.
Let me tell you why I like this really quick, Rich. You're talking about working on two separate pieces of data, manipulating them individually, and then putting them into outputs, into different indexes. You could, in theory, do the same thing with the same single source of data. You could input it into two separate areas and only supply the information that you need. And that's something that I think a lot of folks need to do that they don't quite know how without like rebuilding the entire pipeline again, where it becomes I have to like copy and paste and then do a whole bunch of more work and then change the output. And now I have these two Docker instances that are running Logstash and doing all this different stuff. Whereas if you're taking like a bunch of information, you have like, again, in my case, I have usually work with CSV files that are thousands of columns, not rows, which is really annoying at times. But I need to work with that data in multiple ways and put different pieces of that data in different areas. I can do that and do it with a few config files, but one total Logstash Docker instance. And I like how you kind of explain that out in this process.
Yeah, because this is, like I said, this has really been based on experience. And one thing I like to do is, at one point, probably the first 3 years running Elastic Stack, I only had one index. I only had a daily Logstash index. And, it would have fail conflicts sometimes because each developer writing their logs would all go into one giant mapping, essentially. This also kind of shows is like this would be like what we'll call indexes now in Elastic, and this could also be like a data stream. We could change this to kind of be more data stream where I'm not going to update this data. I'm going to update this, so I want this more in an index. And that's another part I'm trying to look at is like, all right, how do you do the data stream format? And what would that look like in the future? Where, this is really, once I write it, it's read-only. I'm not ever going to update that again, unless I need to do some type of update for like a reindex. And like I said, the standout can still be there, and you can just basically just pop it out and remove it from that directory. So when you look at all this, any one of these could be like a group of configurations, and every one of these can be a different source of files. I was just trying to keep a simple kind of how can we build this up. At the same time, I'm showing you guys how to do pipelines. So with that, let's let me kill all this and save our pipelines file. Save this. Let this run. Oh, hold on. This is not going to do what I want. All right, I'm just going to kill this. All I want to do here is delete this. I want to run this as the complete all three services. So Logstash, Elasticsearch, and Kibana. I'm still going to run in the foreground that we can kind of see it go through. Another advantage too sometimes is when I was trying to figure out how I was going to treat the different pipelines, I was able to see it within Logstash, putting that out to the screen. Something, unless I go into the logs, I might not see. And I think sometimes, like watching the logs flow, sometimes gives me ideas of like, okay, oh wow, look at this. How can I change this or not change that? Or is it working as expected, just simple out to the screen? So let's go into. All right, so now we're in here. So I'm going to go down to stack management. And one trick, if you see, hey, create index, that means you have data in Elasticsearch. If this doesn't pop up like create index, it means like your data did not make it into Elasticsearch. And I've done that a few times recently. So I'm going to do 2 indexes. So I'm going to create a pattern. This one's going to be Docker dash. Click on next. Select a timestamp or time field. Create index. All right. I'm going to create another one for Logstash.
I think you got to hit the create index pattern again, right?
Oh, yeah, good one. Yes. And if you do push your data directly into Elastic and you test them, you do this many, many times. So, little interesting thing, I have 3 timestamps in this index. I have timestamp itself, which and I have a timestamp date added and when it was retrieved. So just a little bit of a note so you can add multiple timestamps in your index. Now I'm going to do something else is I'm going to import from my older, actually it's a Kibana board for Pocket. So here, it actually fix some, well, I like about this now recently, it will fix some of your errors. It will ask you, hey, we're about to replace this. So we can go into discovery. I'm going to look at the last 2 years. We're wrapping up. This is almost done. So if I do data source, you can see Docker commands I have more recently. If I filter that out, oh, my issue here is I want to go to Pocket. And I'll show you, you can create another index pattern that's Logstash ***, which will have both. So you can see I have Pocket data, my source here. And I also have my, if we go into visualizations, I already created some visualizations here. And let's just go into dashboard. And you can kind of see, once you create your dashboards too, you can easily import them into your environment. You see here, I'm looking at the last 10 years, which was my default. And the last 2 years, not big, a little bit smaller. So that's really it. That's all I have. If there's any questions, let me know.
All right. I think we'll give people a second to get some questions going in. But thank you so much, Rich. Let everybody know a little bit more about the OC user group that you run, because I know that that's something that we've kind of been working with, as obviously people are kind of moving to virtual, but at the same time, we do hope that people can meet up. And the long story short here is Rich and I don't live too far away from each other, so hopefully I'll be able to attend some of these as well in the near future.
Okay. It's actually it's the last like LA meetup. It's always contention point between OC and
OC, LA. I'm from San Diego, so for me, OC, LA, it's all the same.
Yeah. So yeah, I run the Elastic LA user group for the last 6 years, and now the last year and over a year now, it's been all virtual. But I've actually taken on this opportunity. I've had people speak from Texas, from Canada, from New Jersey. I've actually had a couple speakers from Europe. The whole thing about running a meetup is don't be afraid to ask. And when we're doing in-person meetups, it's like, okay, who am I gonna get what venue am I gonna get? And then I find the speakers, because with LA, who knows where that person's coming from. So that's a challenge. Yeah, but I've had Disney host. They've been one of my regulars. Ticketmaster, True Cars hosted, Edmonds. But I try to go all over LA as much as possible. I've done some in Irvine. And as Jay was mentioning, we're going to try to do a little more Southern California and have something rotate quarterly, something like that coming up once we open things up. But I really enjoy this product. Just the evolution of all the new features. It is so hard to keep up. You know, version 10, 7.10 was on, if you launched this in January, that's what version you would have. Right now, we're approaching 7.15. So if you really break that down, it's almost like every 6 weeks there's a new release. And my recommendation, what I've done over time is, you know what, be patient. Because if the feature isn't there yet, it probably will be coming in one of the newer features down the road. And just figure out how you're going to manage your current infrastructure, your current stack, and then figure out, okay, now I'm going to implement this. And Kibana is moving really fast. Everything that's in Kibana is essentially an API on the Elasticsearch side of things. So it's a really powerful tool. I've been really enjoying it. I can talk hours about this, obviously, but it's a great group, great people like Jay. I met a ton of different Elastic people, but building the community has been a lot of fun because I'm meeting people across the city, and the common interest is doing something with Elastic Stack.
And I'm glad you mentioned Kibana, because I want to tell everyone as we wrap up about one, Elasticon Global. Make sure if you haven't yet, you sign up for that. Definitely, I went to my first Elasticon Global last year. I had a blast. It was all virtual. This one's all virtual. So you can definitely check it out during the day. Let your boss know. It's going to be a great experience, a lot of stuff to learn. And one of the talks that I actually got to help make sure happened was accessibility in Kibana, talking about how Kibana is so important, not just from the standpoint of visualization, but making sure that anybody can visualize it, and providing a lot of accessibility compliance metrics to make sure that our features are accessible as possible to anyone and everybody wanting to use it. So Elasticon is going to be the October 5th through 7th. Be sure to RSVP now, or whenever you can, just do it. That said, Rich, thank you so much for hanging out. If people want to get the Logstash repo that you're working on with some of the info, I have it down here. Also, check out what Rich is doing in the LA user group. Some of my favorite talks, including the Disney one and the PayPal one, kind of came out of there. I think those were both great. And I do know that you're doing a lot of stuff with like web browsing history and stuff, and I'm super interested to know more about that. So I think we're going to have to do like a tag team live stream on like browser history and analytics and things like that.
Yeah, and I think so. Kind of hit the one I finally just did, the history, because to me it's like, how can I make this useful for myself? Because I hate, I want to search how many times my Docker command is not working now. What did I run? I use history all the time, and it's just fun being able to kind of play around. Once you work with your own data, it just makes it so much more interesting, because it's really hard. I presented my stuff on Getpocket. If you're not a Getpocket user, you have no idea what I'm talking about. It might look cool, but you don't know the ins and outs. And so, but yeah, it's a lot of fun trying to do these personal projects that you can just build your skills around.
It's a great way for people to learn a technology and then bring it to the table when it comes to like, hey, what tool should we be using? It's like, well, I use this in my spare time. It also is a good way to become a subject matter expert. So if you're not ready for that, maybe you don't volunteer that information out there in the public. I've made that mistake a few times, and hey, what can I say? It got me a job, so I'm happy about that. Everyone, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you for hanging out with Rich. Rich, thank you again for sharing this information. I'm going to pick your brain later because I've got stuff that I want to do now with some of the content that you provided. But everyone, my guest has been Rich. Next week, we have another great guest from outside of Elastic Land. We're going to be talking about bullet journaling and how people in tech can do it. So, like, it is, again, you never know what you're going to expect here. I've been a bullet journalist for 6 years now. My guest has been about the same amount of time, and it's going to be a great conversation. Maybe you don't bring your Elastic questions there, but definitely if you got productivity questions, we'll be available for that. But for Rich and myself, I've been Jay Miller. This has been the Elastic User Group. And until next week, take care.
All right. See ya. Thank you.